The air in the Central Command briefing room was thick with the scent of stale coffee and unearned confidence, a heavy mixture that settled like dust over the meticulously planned digital displays that wallpapered the central hub. Every surface gleamed with technology. Satellite feeds stitched together a seamless, high-resolution rendering of the desert theater, seismic readouts scrolled across holographic projectors, and predictive analytics churned constantly, reassuringly, in the top corner of the main screen. Elara sat quietly at the periphery, an analyst by title, which in this room meant she was the person who was supposed to handle the paper, a function rapidly becoming obsolete in the digital-first military world. Her presence was a quiet, unwanted footnote to the grand, orchestrated theater of military logistics. Her only tools that weren't plugged into a multi-million-dollar server rack were a battered, leather-bound notebook and a sheaf of hand-drawn maps rolled and secured with a fraying piece of twine. It wasn't the uniform, the rank, or the stern, humorless set of her jaw that drew the mocking glances. It was the notebook and its antiquated companion, the physical map, that betrayed her. Major Sterling, a man whose polished boots and crisply starched collar spoke louder than any of his strategic advice, cleared his throat with a sound that demanded deference and attention. The insertion point remains Alpha 6. The data modeling is conclusive, analyst. The dry wadi offers maximum concealment and minimal heat signature retention. He didn't look at Elara. He addressed the screen, and through it, the collective expertise of the room, implicitly dismissing any non-digital, non-sanctioned perspective. He spoke with the flawless, detached certainty of a man who trusts algorithms more than instinct, a man whose career had been built on the flawless precision of remote sensing and automated risk assessment. Elara felt the familiar prickle of heat behind her eyes, not anger, but the exhausting, psychic weight of knowing she was right when no one wanted to listen. Her map, the one secured with that ridiculous twine, had been drawn over 2 years of personal, unpaid, unauthorized reconnaissance, a map etched with graphite, smudged with desert dust, and annotated with observations about wind shear, deep soil composition, and subterranean water runoff that the satellite imagery simply couldn't register. It was a masterpiece of ground truth, detailing the microtopography, the exact, almost imperceptible shifts in the sand dunes, the locations of ancient, hidden geothermal vents, and the paths of subsurface water that created unpredictable, temporary sinkholes. Her notebook was filled not with coordinates, but with the esoteric observations of a desert savant, the flight patterns of indigenous birds that signal the hidden water source, the specific mineral composition of certain rock faces that created an acoustic echo chamber, and the barely there scent of deep-root foliage that signaled a collapse risk beneath the surface. She'd spent her weekends, her leave, her entire existence for 2 years tracing those lines on foot, feeling the subtle, dangerous vibrations of the earth through the soles of her worn boots. It was knowledge earned through sweat, dehydration, and silent, lonely dedication. But to Major Sterling and his cohort of PowerPoint warriors, it was a childish relic, an embarrassing intrusion of the analog into a digital domain. The general, a towering figure of granite-like stoicism and a veteran of 3 campaigns, nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the green-lit, computer-generated route. Alpha 6 it is, then. 200 souls, the best we have, will be on the ground in 5 hours. No variables, Major. The Major beamed, a flash of white, artificial confidence. None, General. Predictable, contained, textbook. Predictable, contained, textbook. The words were a bell-tolling disaster in Elara's mind, a rhythmic, fatal beat. She raised her hand, a small, tentative gesture that was nevertheless met with a collective, heavy sigh from the room. Sterling didn't even turn fully. Yes, analyst. His voice was laced with an impatience that bordered on outright contempt, an impatience that suggested her interruption was not just unhelpful, but disrespectful to the efficiency of the machine. Sir, Elara's voice was low, strained, forced to fight against the inertia of institutional dogma. The Alpha 6 Wadi, the digital model, is based on last year's hydrographic survey. The deep drilling 2 weeks ago, 7 kilometers east, destabilized the shale layer beneath that specific section. It's created a stress fault that runs directly under the insertion point. The ambient temperature shift at the time of insertion, dawn, when the surface cools and contracts, will create a thermal contraction that, combined with the load profile of the deployment vehicles, will exceed the tensile strength of the caprock. It's not a wadi, sir. It's a fissure waiting to open. She spoke with the quiet, devastating certainty of a mathematician reading a proven theorem, a certainty so absolute it should have been chilling. Sterling finally turned, a faint, patronizing smirk playing on his lips, not at her logic, but at her method. He walked over to her station, leaned over, and picked up her rolled map with 2 fingers, as if handling something distasteful or contaminated. "And this," he said, holding up the hand-drawn paper for the room's amusement, "is the source of your concern? A personal hobby, analyst? A watercolor landscape? We rely on 3 separate, confirmed satellite sources and seismic data that is less than 12 hours old. You rely on pencil and paper, ma'am. Your stress fault theory lacks any measurable digital signature. It's conjecture." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room, the low hum of collective dismissal. The general, though, his eyes narrowed, an old warrior's instinct fighting against the major's dismissive arrogance. He didn't trust Sterling's certainty, but he also couldn't ignore the mountain of digital evidence. "Analyst, your evidence is anecdotal. The risk assessment places the probability of an incident at Alpha 6 at 0.0001%. We cannot divert a major deployment based on a hunch." Elara pressed on, her voice rising now, gaining the desperate timbre of a prophet whose warnings are falling on deaf ears. "It is not a hunch, General. It's differential analysis. The satellite measures surface reflectance and heat. I measured vibration. I spent a week sleeping on that shale, and the frequency signature shifted after the drilling. The load-bearing capacity has been compromised by microscopic fractures that are now filling with brine runoff. It will look solid right up until the moment it isn't. I have the data, sir, right here." She tapped the worn leather of her notebook, the cover scratched and faded from years of field use. "My map details an alternate insertion point, Delta 9, a ridge line 5 kilometers north. It's less concealed, but it's geologically stable. It's ancient igneous rock." Sterling scoffed. "Delta 9 is exposed to the west, analyst. It would put our assets at unnecessary thermal risk at sunrise. It would put them on solid ground, Major. And I can tell you exactly when the shadow of the eastern massif will cover them. It's an 11-minute window, precisely, that provides the necessary cover. It's in the notes." Her hand trembled slightly as she opened the notebook, revealing pages of dense, tiny handwriting and complex, hand-drawn diagrams, a true synthesis of geology, meteorology, and military logistics. The general hesitated, his gaze shifting from the sterile, glowing screen to the messy, passionate reality of Elara's paper map. For a moment, the conflict was visible, the old guard's trust in the ground versus the new guard's worship of the cloud. The silence stretched, heavy with the fate of 200 men. Then, Sterling's voice, smooth and fatalistic, cut in. "General, with respect, we are 3 minutes from launch confirmation. We must trust the established protocol. The cost of a last-minute diversion, the confusion, the potential for security breaches is far higher than this statistically insignificant geological risk." The word statistically was the killer. It was the impenetrable shield of the digital age. The general sighed, the deep, exhausted sound of a man forced to choose between proven methodology and unsettling intuition. "Major Sterling is correct. We adhere to the plan. Analyst, log your descent, but Alpha 6 is locked in." Dismissed. Elara felt a cold sickness settle in her stomach, the terrifying certainty of impending doom. She didn't argue further. She simply closed her notebook, the faint thwack of the leather cover the only sound of her defeat, and left the room, the image of the digital map, green and glowing and fatally wrong, burned into her mind. The deployment proceeded with the ruthless efficiency only a massive, well-oiled military machine can achieve. The transport aircraft, heavy with the weight of 200 fully equipped men and their vehicles, cut through the night air, silent dark sharks cruising toward the fatal coordinates. Elara didn't go home. She couldn't. She retired to a secondary, less used observation post, a small, dusty bunker tucked away from the main hub's activity, and began to work, her hands moving over her paper map with a frantic, desperate intensity. Her struggle was now internal, a silent, frantic race against the clock and the crushing weight of her own ignored knowledge. She took the coordinates of Alpha 6, 31.4285. Ring operator. N, 44.7192. Ring operator. E, and overlaid them with a series of transparent acetate sheets. Each sheet represented a different, hand-logged data set. One for the micro-vibrational shifts she'd recorded from her field sensors, one for the brine runoff channels from the 2-week-old drilling site, and a third for the highly localized atmospheric pressure gradients that would influence the dawn cooling cycle. The intersection point, a small, innocent-looking X on the digital map, was a nexus of red and black ink on her overlay. The total collapse probability wasn't 0.001%. According to the ground truth, it was a near certainty, a 98% likelihood of failure within a 5-minute window of the expected deployment time. The sheer arrogance of the digital model, its assumption of generalized stability over localized, dynamic instability, was going to cost 200 lives. Elara typed a brief, final message to the general, bypassing Sterling and every layer of bureaucracy, a direct, high-priority warning flagged with the highest security clearance she could muster. The message was concise, devoid of emotion, and purely data-driven. Immediate rerouting to Delta 9 essential. Ground stability at Alpha 6 compromised by high-velocity subsurface flow, 1.2 meters per second, through fractured shale layer. Predicted time of catastrophic failure, T plus 4 minutes from deployment. Reiterate Delta 9, 31.4510. Ring operator. N, 44.6880. Ring operator. E, stable igneous bedrock. She sent it and watched the confirmation flag change to read. The general was officially warned, but the inertia of the system was a physical force, a tidal wave that couldn't be stopped by a single, desperate message. She knew the conversation that would follow. The general showing Sterling her message. Sterling pulling up the digital Model 1 last time to confirm its placid, glowing safety. The decision being made to trust the multi-million-dollar machine over the lone analyst. Still, Elara continued her work, her movements precise and automatic. If she couldn't stop the initial catastrophe, she could at least prepare for the immediate aftermath. She began to draw the extraction route from Delta 9, the stable ridge line, back to a safe zone. This wasn't just a matter of moving them. It was about the logistics of moving 200 disabled personnel and their heavy equipment through a hostile environment with the element of surprise now lost. She marked small, high-ground pockets of dense, iron-rich sand, which she knew from her field tests provided excellent thermal shielding from aerial observation. She traced a path around a series of small, natural acoustic dead zones, areas where a low-lying atmospheric inversion layer would swallow engine noise, a detail no satellite could ever capture. Her notebook was the soul of the mission now, a manual for survival written in graphite and ink. The minutes bled into each other, agonizingly slow. She could track the aircraft in real time, tiny blips of light on a screen in her bunker, closing inexorably on the doomed X. She didn't pray, but she felt a profound, chilling emptiness, the sensation of witnessing a distant, unavoidable train crash. Her focus sharpened to a razor's edge. She had to be ready for the moment the signal went red, the moment the mission went from textbook to catastrophic failure. She double-checked her Delta 9 coordinates, running a final calculation on the shadow coverage. 11 minutes. 11 minutes of cover at dawn. It wasn't much, but it was 200 lives worth of time. The mission was predicated on total darkness. Moving them under a rising sun was a death sentence. But this 11-minute window, a result of the exact angle of the sun hitting a specific massif at that longitude and latitude, was her only asset. Then, the world shattered. Not with a bang, but with a sudden, devastating silence. On the main feed in Elara's bunker, the 4 separate tracking signatures, representing the 4 heavy transport vehicles, didn't just stop moving. They winked out, replaced by a single, flashing red icon labeled communications loss. The airwaves, which had been buzzing with the routine chatter of landing procedures, instantly fell silent, followed seconds later by a cacophony of panicked, overlapping calls from the control tower. Alpha 6, Confirm status. Alpha 6, repeat status. The screen in the central hub, Elara knew, had to be a blinding, chaotic mess. She watched the secondary seismic readouts she had rigged up. A massive, sudden spike, a magnitude 4.1 seismic event, not an earthquake, but a massive structural collapse. The shale cap had failed. The ground had opened up. The 200 men, their vehicles, their supplies, swallowed by a hidden fissure, a dry wadi that was anything but dry. The chilling certainty she had carried for hours now turned into a white-hot, professional detachment. The general's voice, rough and barely recognizable, came over the encrypted line to all command posts. We have a catastrophic failure at Alpha 6. Sinkhole event. Estimated depth unknown. Casualty rate high. All units, go to emergency protocols. Major Sterling, what is your assessment of the secondary geological stability? Sterling's response was a stammering, broken mess. The model is running a post-event analysis, General. It shows no prior indication. The system is still trying to reconcile the data. I have no secondary assessment, sir. Our entire response protocol was based on Alpha 6 being stable. The digital age had failed. The data model had not only been wrong, it had failed to account for the possibility of its own failure, leaving command blinded and defenseless. The only functional information in the entire command structure now resided in Elara's battered notebook. The general bypassed Sterling entirely, his instinct finally taking over, his mind desperately grasping for any alternative. Analyst Elara, report. What did you see? What did your ground assessment tell you about Alpha 6? Elara's voice, when she spoke, was calm, steady, and utterly without triumph, a cold, clear beacon in the panic. General, Alpha 6 is a total loss as an operational area. Subsurface flow has turned the area into a mud-sand mix. Deployment vehicles are submerged, but the immediate vicinity around the fissure shows low heat signatures. The men who survived the initial collapse are likely trapped, but not yet crushed. We have a window, General, but not much time before the hostile forces realize the communication silence is not a successful insertion, but a disaster. She held her paper map up to the screen, adjusting her camera until the hand-drawn lines were perfectly in focus. The initial rescue must be conducted from Delta 9, the ridge line I indicated. The area is geologically sound, and it provides the only stable approach for heavy recovery equipment. We need air support rerouted to Delta 9 immediately to establish a perimeter and drop climbing gear and high-tensile ground anchors. They will rappel in from the stable side of the ridge, not attempt to approach the sinkhole directly. The general looked at the clear, simple lines of the hand-drawn map. He looked at the precise, handwritten note about the 11-minute shadow. He looked at Major Sterling, slumped and pale, staring at a screen filled with incoherent error codes. The choice was not a choice at all. Sterling, secure all digital systems. Analyst Elara, you are now mission commander for the rescue and extraction. Your map is the operational plan. Give me coordinates and instructions. Now, the entire operational theater shifted from a high-tech, digital war room to an analog command post orbiting Elara's small, dusty bunker. Major Sterling, chastened and humiliated, was relegated to merely transcribing Elara's hand-drawn coordinates onto the screens for the flight crews, a purely secretarial role. The general watched, mesmerized, as Elara laid out the plan. The vehicles are lost, General. We focus only on personnel. Delta 9 is here. She pointed to a carefully inked X. The approach is challenging. We must use a silent insertion profile. My notes indicate a series of high-density mineral deposits along the ridge line. They interfere with ground radar, but they also mask low-frequency engine noise. We exploit that. 2 heavy-lift helicopters will approach from the northwest, below the radar fence, using the acoustic shadow I logged. They must deploy the anchors precisely along the ridge crest, this dark line here. The crest is only 1.5 meters wide in places, so the pilots must fly by feel, not by instrument. They will not have reliable ground radar. The pilots, veterans accustomed to trusting their HUDs, balked. Ma'am, flying blind into a low-light environment based on a handwritten note? That's outside protocol. The general's voice cut in, raw and final. Protocol failed, Captain. You fly the line the analyst drew. Those are your orders. Elara didn't flinch. She simply turned her attention to the next crucial detail, the extraction route. The men are trapped, but the fissure is narrow. They will be alive, in pockets of space, but injured and disoriented. We need to send in rescue climbers with thermal imaging and high-density, buoyant material. They must use the brine channels to float the injured men out, following the subsurface flow. It is a one-way path, but it will lead them to a small, protected cavern I logged 2 years ago. It's exactly 470 meters from the collapse site. Here, she tapped another X, this one hidden beneath a dense scribble of geological contour lines. The cavern is the designated rally point. It will provide natural protection from aerial attack and is accessible from the Delta 9 ridge line via a nearly vertical chimney I call Vulture's Nest. It is a dangerous climb, but the rock is stable. She showed them a complex cross-section diagram she had sketched in her notebook, detailing the geological strata. The simplicity of the pencil line was terrifyingly convincing. It was not a prediction, it was a blueprint. The plan unfolded in a matter of minutes, a dizzying, multifaceted operation directed entirely by paper. The entire command structure, built on digital superiority, was suddenly dependent on Elara's memory, her field notes, and her intimate, physical knowledge of the terrain. Sterling, now reduced to a glorified typist, was forced to confront the arrogance of his dismissal. He watched Elara, her brow furrowed in concentration, her finger tracing the contours of the desert she knew better than her own home. She spoke of wind gusts, soil dampness, and rock hardness with the easy familiarity of a landscape architect. He had mocked her notebook. Now, every scratch, every coffee stain, every tiny, almost illegible handwritten note was a lifeline to 200 men. The rescue teams launched. Elara was moved to the main command center, where her paper map was now projected onto the central screen, dwarfing the useless, error-strewn digital rendering. The tension was suffocating. Every breath, every sound was amplified. They could hear the voices of the rescue teams over the comms, the frantic, exhausted instructions as they rappelled into the darkness. Anchor secured at Delta 9. I see movement below. The fissure is deep, but the caprock is holding on our side, sending the first rope down. The rescue was agonizingly slow, a test of pure endurance and physical strength. Each of the 200 men had to be located, stabilized, secured, and then lifted or floated out of the subterranean labyrinth. The cavern, Elara's rally point, quickly became a triage center. The problem was not just extraction, it was time. The 11-minute shadow window was approaching, and they still had dozens of men to extract. Elara, watching the clock tick down, provided continuous, micro-adjustments to the team leaders on the ground, details that only her map could confirm. Team 1, move 10 meters east from your current position. The rock face there is microfractured and will give you purchase for the final ascent. Do not, under any circumstances, place weight on the outcrop 3 meters further. My notes indicate a clay inclusion that will shear. Her words were precise, authoritative, and utterly life-saving. The commanders, initially skeptical, quickly learned to trust the woman whose voice was guiding them out of a digital disaster. The sun began to creep above the horizon, the deadly, high noon light threatening to expose the entire rescue operation to hostile observation. The clock hit the T-3 minutes mark for Elara's shadow window. The last of the 200 men, a badly injured communications sergeant, was being pulled up the chimney of the Vulture's Nest, the final, vertical ascent. Elara watched the feed, her heart hammering against her ribs. The sun's light touched the far side of the extraction ridge. 1 minute. The light crept closer. 30 seconds. The sergeant was still halfway up. The helicopter pilot, pushing the envelope of the extraction, reported heavy heat signatures on his instruments. We're exposed. Taking fire risk. Then, the shadow of the eastern massif, the one Elara had calculated down to the second, crept over the entire ridge line, plunging the extraction site into blessed, deep shadow. It was an impossible, last-second reprieve, a shield provided by a mountain that had been mapped not by a satellite, but by a woman with a pencil and an obsession. The sergeant was pulled to safety just as the shadow enveloped the area. The remaining heavy-lift helicopters secured the last of the equipment and lifted off, disappearing into the sky. their low-frequency engine noise swallowed by the acoustic dead zones Elara had logged. 200 men, all safe, all injured, all saved by a map that was literally drawn by hand. Elara stood for a moment, her entire body shaking with the delayed shock of the near disaster. The general, his face streaked with dirt and exhaustion, walked over to her. He didn't offer a salute. He didn't offer a handshake. He simply placed his hand on the cover of her battered notebook, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Analyst. You saved them all." The aftermath was a blur of high-level inquiries, official reports, and attempts at damage control. The incident at Alpha 6 was officially deemed an unforeseen geological anomaly, a phrase that neatly avoided blaming the $40 million digital modeling system. Major Sterling was quietly reassigned to a logistics post far from the front, his career the quiet casualty of his own arrogance. Elara, the architect of the miracle rescue, became a legend in the shadows. The general recommended her for the highest civilian commendation, a medal presented in a televised ceremony, a moment of public recognition that the military establishment desperately needed to offset the embarrassment of the digital failure. Elara, however, declined. She didn't want the medal, the televised ceremony, or the promotion that would have followed, an offer that would have locked her away in a desk job, trapped within the very system that had nearly killed 200 men. "My job is on the ground, General," she told him simply, her gaze steady. "I need to be where the rock meets the boot. I need to be where the data is messy and real. A desk and a medal won't help me find the next failure point." Her refusal only deepened the legend. She became the ghost of the command center, the one person whose word could override any digital assessment, the one whose tools were pencil, paper, and profound, intimate knowledge. The notebook, however, was not forgotten. It was carefully digitized, its contours and handwritten notes becoming the foundation of a new, experimental ground assessment model, a hybrid system that finally married satellite data with human, on-the-ground observation. The irony was profound. The military's most advanced intelligence system was now built upon the meticulous, hand-drawn work of the woman they had mocked. Elara returned to the field, continuing her solitary work. She was given unlimited travel access and carte blanche to operate outside of conventional protocols. Her job title changed to Advanced Terrain Autonomy Analyst, a meaningless string of words designed to cover the fact that her only function was to walk the ground and write down what she saw. She was still using the same battered leather notebook, now supplemented by newer, tougher paper, the kind that resisted moisture and tearing. She still used the same set of well-worn graphite pencils, the lead soft enough to catch the slightest variation in texture. She walked the new deployment areas, sensing the subtle vibrations of the earth, listening to the wind, reading the patterns of the sand as if it were a living text. She knew, with a certainty that transcended data, that the truth was not in the cloud, but in the dirt. Years passed, and the story of the rescue became a fixture in the military's unofficial oral history, a campfire tale told in hushed tones to young recruits. Trust your gear, but trust the ground more. Remember the woman with the notebook. The 200 men she had saved never forgot. They sent her letters, gifts, and, most frequently, small, geological samples from their home states. A small piece of granite, a chip of shale, a handful of alluvial gold, a silent, physical acknowledgement of her respect for the earth and the lives it held. She kept them all in a large, wooden chest, a silent monument to the value of human observation. One evening, alone in a remote field observation post, she finished a particularly complex map, logging the intricate, shifting subsurface water table of a newly volatile region. She closed the notebook, ran her hand over the worn leather cover, and reflected on the great irony of her life. She had been tasked with the most advanced, high-stakes military analysis, yet her methodology was as old as cartography itself. The machines could calculate probability, the screens could glow with coordinates. But only a human being, willing to suffer the inconvenience of the truth, could look past the surface and read the Earth's heart. Only she, with her mocked notebook, could know where the ground would hold and where it would betray. She looked out over the vast, indifferent desert, the moon casting long, pale shadows that matched the contours of her map perfectly. 200 men, alive, breathing, and home. and all because she was stubborn enough to write it down. The digital world had scorned the analog, but when the systems failed and the lives hung in the balance, it was the messy, beautiful, handwritten truth of the earth that had prevailed, a testament to the enduring power of observation over abstraction. Her work was done for the day, but the desert never slept, and neither did the need for the quiet, lonely truth. She placed the notebook on a small, sturdy rock, ready for the dawn's work, and finally allowed herself to rest, a sentinel of the sublime. Simple truth of paper and pencil against the terrifying complexity of a world that refused to look down. Her legacy was not a medal, but a fact. The most valuable piece of intelligence in the entire command structure was not a satellite image or a server farm, but a leather-bound book filled with the handwriting of a woman who preferred the silent counsel of the earth to the noisy approval of men. She closed her eyes, listening to the low, humming frequency of the cooling ground, a sound only she had bothered to note down, a quiet, reassuring promise of stability in a world determined to crumble.